So if you were to look at the common consensus surrounding Aoife, most people including me looked at his kit and thought that this guy was just ass. They released Mizuki again, but originally I was going to make a rant and cook him, but after looking into his kit more and calculating his teams, he actually isn't as bad as people have been making him out to be. In fact, I think he's a solid enough character to be considered, with some caveats I'll cover later in the video. Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Aoife's kit, explaining how he works as well as talk about his constellation dependence, break down his playstyles and compare him to other Onoma units in his niches with calculations. But before we do that, as always, if at any points during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin Meta and I'll try to keep you updated. Shout out to all my lovely channel members, I really appreciate the support. And with that out of the way, let's begin. So Aoife is a 4-star Onoma Catalyst character, how original, and he's primarily going to be played as an EM scaling on-field Onoma driver. Although with his Constellation 6, he can also be a very competent Onoma DPS if you so choose. Besides being Onoma infused, Aoife's normal attacks are nothing special, so let's just move on to talk about his elemental skill. Aoife's a part of the Flower of Feather clan like Traska, so his Night Soul Blessing will have Kakuku lift him up into the air, like her. Aoife will immediately gain 18 Night Soul points, and then his normal attacks will be converted into Onoma Gunfire. You can either hold down his normal attacks or tap fire them. There's really no advantage to tap firing, and holding down his normal attacks can make him fire 12 rounds more consistently, which is his max, so it's better to just hold. His Onoma bullets will deal damage based on his attacks, and he'll also heal the team when he hits an opponent, and the healing is based on his elemental mastery. Although the healing should be in quotation marks because it's very bad. On a full EM build with Hakushin Ring, he heals for around 500 per shot. He gets 12 shots at C0, so that's 6,000 total healing team-wide, which isn't that much. It's enough to go somewhat neutral and fanfare for characters with low base HP, but especially for HP scalers, you will generally just not be able to out-heal Furina's Drain for them to go positive on HP. Though if you aren't using Furina on your teams, this should be enough to keep everyone topped off, to where I can recommend sustainless Aoife teams. At C0, Aoife will apply Onoma with every other bullet he fires, so that's going to be 6 instances of Onoma application for swirls, which is actually a bit lower than someone like Mizuki can get, though it doesn't end up being that big of an issue, which we'll see later. Now moving on to his elemental burst, it's pretty straightforward. Aoife will fire out a fucking Onoma nuke, and afterwards, similar to Kazuha's whole D, it will create a vacuum that continuously pulls enemies in. And if any of the enemies hit by his elemental burst have an element on them, Aoife will do a weaker absorbed hit of that element. Pretty standard as far as bursts go. Now for his passive talents, his Ascension 4 gives him 80 EM when you trigger a Night Soul Burst, woo! And his Ascension 1 is very interesting actually. For every 1 Night Soul point your team currently has, not the total, Aoife gains a rescue point which grants the team 1.2% reaction bonus for swirls and electrocharge damage, but only when Aoife is in his Night Soul Blessing state, so when he's on field in his skill. And the points have a cap of 150, so at C0 that's 180% reaction damage bonus, assuming you max out the effect. This gives Aoife inherent synergy with someone like a Roron, who will be able to constantly have a high amount of Night Soul points that doesn't get consumed that quickly, as well as someone like Eonton who constantly has above 42 with Aoife. The only issue is that at C0 you won't be able to upkeep the maximum reaction damage bonus assuming it goes off current Night Soul points, but at the same time this is fixed with the C2 as we'll see later, and reaction damage bonus doesn't scale that great anyways past a certain point. It's still nice to have some though, especially after the reaction changes for increasing the damage of EC procs, and will be reflected a lot better in AoE than what I'll show. And that's it for Aoife's base kit. To be honest, without constellations, he isn't anything that remarkable. In terms of performance, he does just outclass someone like Mizuki as a driver, as he can normal attack so his options aren't restricted, his healing is a lot more reliable, and the fact that he enables not just swirls doing more damage but electrocharge procs makes him better overall even at C0. Why is Mizuki a character, man? And even compared to Sucrose, he isn't a downgrade at C0 as a driver. He comfortably is able to compete with her driving teams, and if Fischl isn't being used as an electro option, he should just be better. Just keep in mind for his driving teams you want Auroron, which I don't think is that much of a restriction considering Auroron is the best for taser teams anyways, so you would be using him regardless, and the fact that he's free to pick up right now. So at C0 and most of his constellations, if you want to use him as a driver, you're playing him with VV, full EM and Hakushin Ring, on taser teams with Auroron and whatever setup you want to do, whether that's double Hydro, double Electro, or with an Onoma unit. All of them should be about as good as each other. But let's now move on to talk about constellations, as this is where things get more interesting, and I'll show calculations for how how big of an increase his constellations are after discussing them. Aoife's a 4-star, so cons basically do complete his kit. It's just unfortunate that with the state the game is currently in, 4-star constellations are a pain in the ass to pull for, but I digress. His constellation 1 is actually kind of bad. It gives him 12 flat energy at rotation, but Aoife doesn't really struggle with energy that much already. You're using him with a Roron who already gives 9 flat energy, and he also runs Hakushin Ring, which covers all his energy needs as a driver. And if you're playing him as a carry, then he uses a C6 Farzan, who's an amazing battery, so Aoife never really needs to build more than 130 ER on his teams, and can comfortably run 0 ER in teams where you have a Roron and Farzan. The C1 just makes it so that his ER recs are virtually 0 in all of his teams, which is fine I guess, but kind of unnecessary. Aoife's Constellation 2 essentially makes him maintaining a high amount of reaction damage bonus more realistic, as if you have a buff 60, which is easily achievable with Auroron or Eonson, as they retain a high amount throughout your rotation, then you will almost always be pushing the cap on his reaction damage bonus. And the cap also goes from 180% total to 216% total, so the buff is even stronger. C3 is for his skill talent. C4 makes his grouping last longer, which is great as he may have good grouping with this if the pull is as strong as Kotwa's. Also, you get 100 elemental mastery in him when he bursts, so with the C4, if you're playing him as a driver, you want to open your rotations with the burst for the EM buff. Speaking of his burst, his Constellation 5 buffs that. And lastly, we can talk about his C6. So how this works is that when Aoife holds down his normal attack and is firing bullets, there's a 50% chance that he just does an additional normal attack that does 20% more damage. So on average, this is like getting 6 more normal attacks for free. And the reason why this is nuts is that it resets his hit count ICD, meaning that you get more Onoma applications, and it also triggers his healing, making him heal 6 more times on average than he normally would. And at C6, this also opens the door for you to use him as an Onoma carry, because looking at his damage increase from his constellations, his C6 basically doubles his damage from C0, which was quite poor, to now actually somewhat competent. Also, don't be scared about the increase he gets from driving teams. He is less than a quarter of the damage on driving teams regardless, so even though it doubles his damage as well, it's double the damage on a team where Aoife does 1/4 of it, so it's less of an overall team DPS loss, if that makes sense. I do think it kind of sucks a lot that at least for his carry teams, you pretty much need a C6 to make it work, otherwise he's actually just not clearing. Though it doesn't stop there, because you are ideally going to want a C6 Farzan and a C6 Auroron or Eonson, all of which aren't really that accessible, because 4-star constellations are the worst things to get in this game, and Hoyoverse really needs to fix this issue. So despite the numbers I'm about to show, put in context that getting a C6 Aoife is going to be extremely hard to do. For pure meta reasons, you'd much rather get 5-star cons of a DPS you like. You'd only want to pull for Aoife cons if you really like him, but I would not recommend it due to how much pulling for 4-star sucks. Alas, with the warnings cleared, let's see how much he stacks up. I am going to be showing Aoife at Constellation 6, but I'll have a note at the bottom saying how much DPS is lost for not having it or having him at C0, in which let's just start with what most of you will be playing him as, being an Onoma driver. Right off the bat, as I've already explained, he kind of just washes Mizuki. Even if we are to use the exact same team, and even though Mizuki gets more swirls on average and has a stronger swirl buff, Aoife is able to buff his own elemental mastery as well as his raw talent scaling being higher with the C6, to where he just does more personal damage, and the fact that he buffs EC reaction damage makes the entire team do more damage. Even at C0, Aoife is already competing with, if not better than, his C0 Mizuki, while also just being more comfortable to pilot, with him hovering more in the air. So like Chaska, he may be able to just hover above most attacks while not getting hit. So overall, Aoife is going to be better than Mizuki as a driver, but the bar was already in hell. Now for Sucrose, Aoife also seems to be a sizable upgrade over her at C6, even with the fact that Sucrose rotations align better with Fischl's uptime. This means that if you aren't using Fischl, the gap between them is also going to be bigger, at least in single target. But Sucrose still does have some advantages, like the fact that she can get multiple skill casts per rotation, and she has her elemental burst, both of which are really solid grouping abilities, and are able to stagger enemies consistently, where we haven't seen footage of how good Aoife's grouping is, so if it's worse than Sucrose's, Sucrose could just be better in AoE than Aoife. And if Aoife's gliding is like Chaska, where he can just hover over enemies, I think it's pretty fair to say that he is just going to be the best Onoma driver in the game right now, and not just a downgrade, making him have an actual good niche if you want to play these teams. The only issue with them is that they have pretty bad vertical investment paths, as the damage is mostly predicated on your off-field units who already are lower tuned than dedicated carries, and especially with Aoife, who doesn't have 5-star level cons, there isn't much you can do to make the team much better than its floor, as very little things aid driving teams. If you do want to take Aoife further than an Onoma driver and you happen to get his C6 and his C6 Farzan, then you can actually just play Aoife as a carry, and it surprisingly isn't horrible. You have either two routes you can go down. You can either hyper buff his damage using both Bennett and Eonson to give Aoife attack, because he has one of the lowest base attacks in the game for whatever reason, and playing this team gives you comparable numbers to using Wanderer's shielded teams, which the bar, but still. The biggest issue with his hyper buff teams is that it doesn't really take advantage of the rest of his kit, like the fact he enables increased reaction damage bonus, because both Bennett and Elanson have no off-field application, which is why instead of using them, I'd more likely lean towards a team like this with Furina and Auroron. Aoife still wants to be built with attack and crit, but this allows Auroron and Furina to proc Electrocharged, and either Aoife or Farazan will be able to continuously swirl the EC aura. Something I find funny is that you can also just run a full EM VV Farazan here since she isn't penalized by building this. I still calculated her with Tenacity just because I was unsure of how well the auras would play out in practice, because you'd have both Aoife and Farazan applying Onimo, though I assume this would be the best way to play the team. And compared to Wanderer and Zhao with their strongest teams, Aoife actually has pretty comparable performance to Wanderer in single target, but they both lose to Zhao because Xianyun is a stupid unit. In AoE, it really does depend on how good Aoife's grouping is. Farazan already pulls in enemies a decent amount if you're using her, and if you can get consistent Electrocharge swirls with both the Aoife and Farazan, as well as constant Electrocharge triggers, then his AoE performance should also just be top tier as well, making him a very well-rounded carry. Overall, I think I would like to give Aoife an apology because he isn't nearly as bad as I initially thought he would be. Despite not being anything really meta-breaking, even from C0 he's one of the most competent Onoma drivers, and at C6 not only is he just the best Onoma driver we have currently, but he also can be played as a carry if you really want to. I do expect his driving teams to be his best usually, unless you have something like Wriothesley's signature, but other than that, just put the 4-piece VV in the bag. Aoife's just an okay unit, not anything near the worst 4-star, and he also thankfully isn't just Mizuki again. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Aoife, as I would love to hear and respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, I love all of you. Thank you for the continued support. There is too many of you now. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.